and it's a case study of Drawdown Toronto in the climate action space. Our team was Aisha, myself, and Vinit, who you've already met, as well as Neha and Sumona. Unfortunately, they couldn't join us today, but everybody participated in the content that you'll hear. As Peter said, we're strategic foresight and innovation master's students, and we completed this work under the supervision of Peter Jones and Jeremy Bowes. So Drawdown, as many of you already know, is the future point in time when levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere stop climbing and start to steadily decline. Project Drawdown is a nonprofit organization that seeks to help the world reach the point of drawdown by 2050. Project Drawdown conducts an ongoing review and analysis of climate solutions, the practices and technologies that can stem and begin to reduce the excess of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, to provide the world with a current and robust resource. Project Drawdown provides a framework. That's one of the key things that they've created. And this framework and a menu of solutions is made freely available to all in their mission to share knowledge and help the world reach drawdown. They focus on these three overarching themes to be addressed globally, simultaneously, and with determination to reach the point of drawdown. They are reducing sources, so bringing those emissions to zero, supporting sinks by uplifting nature's carbon cycle, such as forests and oceans, and improving society. So fostering equality for all can actually have a huge impact as well. Project Drawdown has identified the key source areas to target as being electricity production, food, land and agriculture, industry, transportation, and building. And those are part of the framework within these three elements. So just to explain a little bit more about Project Drawdown as an organization, so the larger Project Drawdown, they are supported by researchers worldwide who share their findings, partnerships with other environmental organizations and businesses, Project Drawdown staff, and advisory committees. The organization is funded by individual and institutional donations. And as a 501c3 nonprofit organization, they work independently. So this means that donors have no influence over their work or the solutions that they present. So it creates so they're not biased. Through various initiatives such as Drawdown Solutions, Drawdown Communities, and Drawdown Lift, Project Drawdown provides a list of climate action solutions, informs citizens, governments, public and private sectors through free science-based educational resources, inspires and informs change by private sector partners, elevates public discourse and inspires action, shares tangible examples of real-world actions, improves society, and accelerates solutions by informing and inspiring voters, taxpayers, and consumers to take collective action and influence policymakers, corporations, and others in their area. The Project Drawdown approach has inspired localized groups such as Drawdown Toronto. We took a two-prong approach to exploring the system. First, gathering information to get a broad understanding of the climate action space with the lens of Project Drawdown as a key actor. Then looking at Drawdown Toronto as a case study of an organization working in the climate action space in the GTA region. In this work, we use various tools and methods to help understand the system and map out stakeholders, key influences and challenges, and derive some recommendations, which we'll go into further. Our research really attempts to address two key questions. First, what are the climate challenges that need to be addressed in the next 10 years? And how can we engage key stakeholders to implement actionable climate change solutions? For the purpose of defining the scope of our project, we established the following geographic boundaries. Canada as a geographic boundary for the Visualized Climate Action System, and the GTA as the geographic boundary for Drawdown Toronto. Establishing these boundaries helped us understand and frame solutions with contextual relevance and understand the challenges that are specific to a local region. And now I will pass it over to Aisha to take you through framing the system.
Thank you so much, Janine. The next step was the iterative inquiry. After identifying the research questions, we used the iterative inquiry tool to map out functions, structures, components, processes, and purposes for each level of project drawdown's intervention in the climate action space. The final iteration, which you can see on this slide, starts with project drawdown as an organization at the micro level to the organizations and businesses inspired by project drawdown's vision, which is at the meso level, to business and community impacts of implementing the drawdown framework and solutions at the exo level, and then the final culmination at a collective and global execution of climate action solutions at the macro level. Each influences the next level. As an organization inspired by Project Drawdown, Drawdown Toronto exists at the meso level. In the next step, we identified the key actors in the climate action space. With the iterative inquiry, we were able to have Canada as a geographic boundary, and from this point onwards, all the tools that you see and the analysis that you see has Canada as a geographic boundary. So from the list of actors, long list of actors, we identified key stakeholders and mapped them on a matrix of power and knowledge. A key insight from this particular stakeholders map was that in the climate action space, collective action is directly related to power and influence. Climate action solutions are effective only when the communities are active participants in the co-creation and implementation of these solutions. Therefore, there is great potential to empower the citizens with knowledge and awareness about climate change issues in order to mobilize change. The overall climate action space is more of an ecology rather than a hierarchy, with a lack of awareness and apathy in communities serving as a major barrier for effective climate action. Some stakeholders, as you can see in this map, such as the media and activists, have the power to bridge the knowledge gap between policymakers and the communities and can play a role as important accelerators. After identifying the key stakeholders, we used another tool, which was the influence map, to uncover challenges at various levels and the relationships between the key stakeholders in the climate action space. Some of the key challenges that emerged, and these are just key challenges, this is by no means an exhaustive list, are scalability. So localized drawdown groups are hugely varied in their organizational structures and available supports. Stable organizational structures and plans are required for effective social change and sustainable social change, and to avoid creating an echo chamber with existing climate action actors. In terms of citizen action, citizens have equal power as much as the government due to their collective ability to mobilize and influence change. However, citizens may not be aware of their power to enact change or may just be indifferent to climate change problems. In terms of government action, there is potential for creating long-term turnover-proof plans within government which are reinforced by taxpayer influence. And in the end, there's a need for greater advocacy about existing climate change solutions, so there are more opportunities for collaboration with businesses and communities. After completing the first phase of our secondary research, we moved on to primary research, and we conducted semi-structured in-depth interviews with 3 members of Drawdown Toronto's core team to gain insights about their on-ground experiences and lived realities. Several valuable insights emerged from these interviews, but the key actionable insights are highlighted here. We feel these are the ones that are most relevant to Drawdown Toronto. First, the Toronto chapter is completely volunteer driven, which is basically akin to a social change organization. The volunteer driven organizational structure leads to challenges around consistency, resources, lack of funding, and lack of manpower. Secondly, there is also a misalignment between the local climate change problems and the City of Toronto's policies. For instance, refrigerants and food waste are the two key climate change issues that can be addressed at the GTA level. However, in the City of Toronto's net zero strategy, they are not considered important sectors for climate action, and very little is done to address them. Third, Drawdown Toronto sees its role as a connector of people or an educational organization that can enable other organizations to use the Drawdown framework to implement solutions at a local level. However, there's very little collaboration between local chapters or even global chapters of Project Drawdown. Some local chapters may not even use the term drawdown in their name. So after completing the interviews, we started the process of synthesizing all the information from both our secondary and primary research for further analysis and recommendations. Now, Vinit will take you through the next steps.
Yeah, thank you so much, Aisha. So we carefully mapped and we carefully understood the system. So a quick overview of Three Horizons. A Three Horizons map is basically a map that constitutes the current challenges and looks at the North Star, which is the future that we want to go. We mapped both of them and we came up with strategic interventions. So after gaining insights from our primary and secondary research, we use Three Horizons framework to identify strategic interventions that can be implemented to accelerate movement towards reaching drawdown. Keeping in mind the boundary of Canada and a 10-year time frame, the short-term strategic interventions that are most relevant and can be executed by Drawdown Toronto are collective community action and stakeholder mobilization to affect change, climate education and awareness campaigns, implementation of local and regional solutions addressing climate change, and lastly, improved political will around climate action. These were some of the insights that emerged from Three Horizons. So now moving forward towards recommendations. How do we transition and how do we make these insights come to fruition in the climate action domain? We start with creating unions. These unions will come into effect in Toronto. These unions would mark first change makers in the space of climate action. This talks about communities for knowledge exchange, and this would also enable Drawdown Toronto to use this force and expedite climate action. The second, at the meso level, leveraging change. We see that a lot of large corporations and big institutes can also be an avid accelerators in the space of climate action. Universities like municipal government, research institutes, and think tanks can also be a way to leverage change. And lastly, at the macro level, which is revolutionizing movements, forever putting all the policies of climate action into forever perpetuity. We will do this by advocating for sustainable outcomes and policies that drive change across all sectors. This would mean that Drawdown Toronto would have unions with the national level, at a provincial level, and at a federal level, which marks new beginning for Project Drawdown Toronto. So now we move towards a synthesis map. This was a brief idea of what we did and all the insights that we gathered during our research and during our systems analysis. So this is our entire systems synthesis map. We will quickly get you in detail with all the findings that we have encountered and how does it relate to climate change, and also how does it relate to Project Drawdown Toronto. Janine will take over we will take you through the synthesis map. Over to you, Janine.
Great, thank you, Vinit. So this is that synthesis map that Peter spoke of earlier. And here you can prominently see, first off, those waves of change that inspired the name. And this, what you're seeing here, is the three horizons diagram that we spoke of earlier. And Aisha will take you through that a little bit further in a moment. But first, I just wanted to give you an overview of how to read something like this. So in the top left, we have the research questions. So that's a good place to enter this map. With the research questions that we spoke of earlier in the PowerPoint, followed by information about who Project Drawdown is, that very important framework that I mentioned, as well as the flow of how the organization actually operates. The framing the system section is next. We do have some causal loops in there, followed by uncovering challenges, and then finally into the Drawdown Toronto's transition to change. So you can kind of enter at any point at this map, but generally speaking, you'll want to go kind of left to right, with one of the primary focuses being that three horizons map. So for framing the system, this is that iterative inquiry method that we talked about, and that has 4 levels. But the one that's going to be most important, I think, to Drawdown Toronto is actually the MISO level, because that's where they'll fit in. So the MISO level is the organization's inspired by Project Drawdown. And looking at the function, it empowers communities with solutions and resources. The structure is Drawdown communities, lab, lift, solutions, donors, localized chapters. Process is fundraising, researching, networking. And the purpose and context is providing support and solutions or techniques to help them in their mission to the different actors working in the climate action space. Each of these will flow into the next, so they will influence each other. The next part of the map I wanted to talk about briefly was the influence map. So in this influence map, first of all, what we did was we wrote down, we identified key challenges, and some of those challenges come directly from the Project Drawdown framework. So those challenges right at the first level, the top level, are reducing those sources, supporting those sinks, and then improving society. So everything, all of the challenges below feed into that, because that's kind of the main goal. That's the strategic outcome. One of the main challenges is to do with those stakeholders that we mentioned earlier. So the government and citizens, both of them have a substantial amount of power, and they both also have the ability to use the resources provided by Drawdown to inform decision making. But sometimes there could be misalignment between these groups, or citizens might think it's government's responsibility, whereas government may think it's citizens' individual responsibilities, where it really takes connected effort on both parties' part. Looking at, for example, the citizens, we have in the deepest influence level, we have how to get citizens to take climate action. That's a big one. Moving into level 4, into influence, it connects to getting citizens to recognize their power to take climate action. So how do we get them to do this? We have to get them to recognize their power. It also feeds into challenge 19, how will Drawdown scale up to have a broader reach? These feed in next to level 3, activity outputs, with challenge 14, connecting individuals with solutions they can administer within their life or workplace. So things that they can do on the everyday. Challenge 19 feeds into challenge 12, measuring the progress and influence Project Drawdown framework and solutions is having on climate change. Challenge 14 goes into challenge 10, coordinating solutions for maximum impact within or between businesses and organizations. And that's at the outcomes level, which continue into that strategic outcomes level. So everything you're sort of seeing below the green connects to one another, influences one another in different ways, but really present some of the key challenges within this particular system. And next, I'll pass it over to Aisha to take you through the 3 horizons map.
Thank you so much. So as I mentioned during the presentation, after completing all our research, we use the 3 horizons framework. The popularly known 3H model creates a profound vision for change planning and is often used as the primary method in creative futures workshopping. The purpose of the 3H mapping is to discover the relationships of change and innovation over the shift of temporal transitions towards preferred future outcomes. So I'll take you through the framework one by one. The first wave highlights the current climate change concerns. Some of the pressing issues include the economic divide, increasing carbon emissions, refrigerants, and waste disposal, just to name a few. The third horizon, or the last wave, identifies elements of the desired future by 2050, which is the point of drawdown, where climate change and sustainability are centric on economy, health, and well-being. The preferred future includes regenerative architecture, circular economy, green jobs, and clean energy. At the intersection of the first wave and the second wave, we also identified the pockets of the future in the present climate action space. These are signals that can be strengthened by investing in activities such as enabling clean tech, green investments by consumers, incentivizing sustainable practices, etc. And at the intersection of the second and the third wave, we identify the elements from the current system that we would like to sustain and preserve in the future, or build upon, such as regenerative system design, circular economies, decolonization, to name a few. The middle wave, or the second horizon, represents the strategic interventions that can be implemented within the next decade to effectively mitigate the adverse effects of climate change. Some of the proposed strategic interventions include collective community action and stakeholder mobilization, climate education and awareness campaigns, implementation of local and regional solutions, investment in clean tech, etc. So for the purposes of the 3 horizons, while the geographic boundary was Canada, but these climate change is a global problem. It's a wicked problem. So it's hard to just have strategic interventions in Canada and not be affected by the rest of the world, and vice versa. So therefore, for the 3H, while we had a lens of Canada, but these are global climate change problems, and the strategic interventions will also have to be global. With this very broad lens, now I will pass it on to Vinit, who will speak specifically about Drawdown Toronto's role in this transition.
Thank you so much, Aisha. So we move towards the final transition, Drawdown Toronto's transition to change. As a culmination of our design journey, we synthesized all the information from our primary and secondary research to propose the way forward for Drawdown Toronto. After gaining a comprehensive understanding of climate change issues and studying Drawdown Toronto's role as an engaged stakeholder in the climate action space, we moved on to the next step. From our analysis and interviews with Drawdown Toronto team, it is evident that their fundamental value proposition is a knowledge sharing body that enables the implementers and change makers to actively work in the climate action space to benefit from Drawdown Toronto's research. The first micro transition. It talks about creating unions and communities for knowledge exchange. At a micro level, Drawdown Toronto needs more excellent organization resources to create a movement that may genuinely be impactful in the local story. The Toronto chapter is new, so there is an immense opportunity to engage with climate action leaders and influencers in the GTA region who can serve as a solid catalyst to create momentum at a societal and create a narrative around climate action that is easily understood by the public. Toronto is a fertile ground for stakeholders' engagement with many NGOs, activists who are passionately working towards climate change. These collaborations will also help us apply for funding, engaging policymakers, implementing local solutions, and community engagement programs that create awareness about climate change and mobilize stakeholders. The success of these programs will establish trust, visibility, and credibility, which will help us move to the next stage. The next stage is at the meso level, where we leverage change. We expand the network to engage with other large networks such as municipal government, universities, research institutes, and think tanks that work in the climate action space. The regional networks we built in the first stage will add value to these collaborations. The GTA region is mighty due to its high density of universities and research institutes. This environment is incredibly supportive of Drawdown Toronto's value proposition of being a knowledge sharing resource, since its audience can understand the scientific research of Project Drawdown, and provides immense leverage for the propagation of Project Drawdown's philosophy. At this stage, media can also play a critical role in helping disseminate information about Drawdown Toronto's work and create awareness about the Drawdown Toronto's framework. The role of media can be an accelerator for behavioral change and awareness creation. And lastly, the macro stage. In the last stage, Drawdown Toronto can exercise influence and create change at a national level and use the leverage connection to engage with the government bodies and policymakers at a federal level. At this level, all the key stakeholders that are acting in the climate action space from leverage network of Drawdown Toronto, and it can become a national movement acting as an intermediary between the civil society and the policymakers. This empowers Drawdown Toronto to apply for funding and operate at a national level and be truly a force for social change in the climate action space. I thank you everyone for listening to our case study. I genuinely encourage everyone to look at our reports and look at our documentation, as well as please do look at our synthesis map. And before we open to your valuable questions and feedbacks, I just have a lovely quote to end this seminar. It is by Adam Grant, which deeply resonated with me, was that there are too many people that spend their lives being dutiful descendants instead of good ancestors. The responsibility of each generation is not to please their predecessors, it is to improve the things for their offspring. It is more important to make your children proud than your parents in this challenging period and the age we live in. Thank you so much. And we thank everyone for listening calmly. We also thank Peter Jones and Jeremy Bowes for taking all our questions and silly feedbacks and encouraging us to work more. Thank you so much, David Berman, for your kind words during your interviews that really moved us in a very slightest way and helped us to get through this project. And also our valuable class and team members who always listen to us and provided good value feedback in order to make this project an immense success. I open up to your comments and questions. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening.
And I'll just leave this up here for now in case you want to go back to any of the slides to answer questions.